The Zero pilot looked down through the canopy, wiping grease from his goggles. Below him lay the blue vastness of the Pacific, broken only by the churning wake of an American aircraft carrier. He blinked. He checked his map. He checked his fuel gauge. It was impossible. 2 hours ago, his squadron had left that same ship a burning, twisted wreck. They had radioed Tokyo that the vessel was sinking. They had celebrated the kill. But looking down now, he saw a pristine flight deck. He saw planes launching. He saw a ship steaming at 20 knots, cutting through the waves as if nothing had happened. It was a ghost. It was a monster that refused to die. This is the story of the USS Yorktown, the ship that broke the heart of the Imperial Japanese Navy. If you want to see more true stories about the machines and men that changed history, just hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep these memories alive. Let's go back to where the miracle began. It was late May 1942, Pearl Harbor. The air in the dry dock was thick with the smell of ozone and burnt steel. The USS Yorktown limped into port, dragging a trail of oil behind her. She looked like a corpse. Her internal frames were bent. Her radar was smashed. Her hull had been ripped open by a Japanese bomb at the Battle of the Coral Sea. The engineers took one look at the damage and shook their heads. The estimate was brutal. To make her seaworthy again, they needed 90 days. 3 months. But Admiral Chester Nimitz didn't have 3 months. He had intelligence reports saying the Japanese were moving on Midway. He needed every flat top he had. He needed the Yorktown. Nimitz looked at the yard commander. The silence in the room was heavy. "We must have this ship back in 3 days. The commander stared at him. "Admiral, that's impossible. We need to rebuild the structural beams." "You have 3 days, and you can forget the structural beams. Just patch the holes so she floats." What happened next was unprecedented in naval history. 1,400 men descended on the ship. Welders, electricians, shipwrights. They swarmed over the hull like ants. They didn't stop for sleep. They didn't stop for food. The dry dock at Pearl Harbor became a blinding spectacle of light and noise. Sparks cascaded down the sides of the ship 24 hours a day. The heat inside the hull was suffocating. Temperatures in the lower decks reached 120 degrees. Men passed out from exhaustion, were dragged topside for fresh air, drank some water, and went right back down. One welder wrote in his diary during a 5-minute break, "The hammer noise doesn't stop. My hands are shaking so bad I can hardly hold a pen. We are sewing this ship together with sweat and stubbornness. The Admiral says she leaves on Tuesday. So she leaves on Tuesday." And she did. Exactly 72 hours later, the Yorktown steamed out of Pearl Harbor. She wasn't fully fixed. Work crews were still on board, fixing the elevators while the ship moved toward the open ocean. She was leaking. She was hurt. But she was fighting. Fast forward to June 4th. Midway, the turning point of the war. The Yorktown was the center of the American line. Her planes had already found the Japanese carriers, but now the Japanese had found her. The air raid sirens began to wail, a low, mournful sound that vibrated through the steel decks. 18 Japanese Val dive bombers screamed down from the clouds. They were the best pilots in the world, and they didn't miss. The first bomb hit. It blew a hole in the flight deck, killing the crews on the Mount 1.1-inch guns. Shrapnel tore through the bodies of the gunners. Then the second bomb, It pierced the smokestack and exploded deep in the bowels of the ship, blowing out the fires in the boilers. The ship shuddered violently. Speed dropped. The hum of the engines died. Silence fell over the ocean, broken only by the crackle of flames. The Yorktown drifted to a halt. Dead in the water. Black smoke billowed into the sky, a tombstone marking her position for every enemy plane for 100 miles. On the bridge, the situation was critical. "Engine room, report!" The voice on the other end was coughing, choking on smoke. "Boilers 1, 2, and 3 are out." "We've got no pressure. Can you fix it?" "We're trying, sir, but it's getting hot down here." The Japanese pilots circled overhead, taking photos. They saw the fire. They saw the ship stopped. They flew back to their carriers and reported a confirmed kill. "American carrier sinking," they said. But they didn't know about the damage control teams. Deep inside the dark, smoke-filled belly of the Yorktown, men were working miracles again. They put on gas masks. They waded through oil and water. They fought the fires with sheer grit. One by one, the boilers were relit. Slowly, the pressure gauge began to climb. The propeller shaft turned. Topside, the sailors felt the vibration beneath their feet. A cheer went up. It started as a murmur and grew into a roar. A giant yellow flag was run up the mast. "My speed is 5 knots. Then 10 knots. Then 15. Within an hour, the Yorktown was steaming at 20 knots. The flight deck crews patched the holes with heavy steel plates and covered them with wood. They swept the debris overboard. When the second wave of Japanese planes arrived, led by torpedo bombers, they were confused. They had been told to look for a crippled, burning ship. Instead, they saw an American carrier moving at combat speed, launching Wildcat fighters. The Japanese flight leader radioed his commander. "Enemy carrier sighted. It is pristine." He assumed it must be a different ship. He assumed the Yorktown was already at the bottom of the ocean. He signaled his squadron to attack this new target. The torpedoes dropped into the water. The Yorktown turned hard to port, heeling over sharply. She dodged the first 2, but she couldn't dodge them all. 2 torpedoes slammed into her port side. The explosion was massive. It felt like the ship had been lifted out of the water and slammed back down. Fuel tanks ruptured. The generator power died instantly. The rudder jammed. The ship immediately listed to port. 10 degrees, 15 degrees, 20 degrees. The ocean began to wash over the hangar deck. Captain Elliot Buckmaster looked at the inclinometer on the bridge. The needle was buried. The ship was groaning, the sound of metal twisting under extreme stress. He knew that if she rolled any further, she would capsize, trapping thousands of men inside. He grabbed the intercom handset. It was dead. He turned to the messenger. "Pass the word, abandon ship." It is the hardest order a captain can ever give. Men began to slide down ropes into the oily water. They threw rafts over the side. They helped the wounded. One sailor, a young kid from Nebraska, wrote about that moment in a letter to his mother. "I looked back at her as I swam away. She looked so tired, like a great beast that had fought too long. I cried right there in the water. I thought that was it. Just noise and fire, and the end of everything." The crew was picked up by destroyers. The sun went down. The Yorktown was left alone in the darkness, listing, silent, empty. But she didn't sink. The next morning, As the sun rose over the Pacific, the destroyers looked out. She was still there. She was floating. The list had stabilized. The fires had burned themselves out. Captain Buckmaster looked through his binoculars. "She's not done yet," he whispered. "Sir?" "Get a volunteer party together. We're going back." "Back on board, sir. It's a death trap." "She's still floating. If she's floating, we can save her." They called for volunteers. Every single hand went up. They selected 29 officers and 141 men, the salvage party. They boarded the ghost ship. The decks were slanted at a crazy angle. To walk from one side to the other, you had to climb uphill, pulling yourself along the railings. They cut away the heavy anti-aircraft guns on the port side to reduce the weight. They pumped water out of the engineering spaces. They worked in silence, listening to the creaking of the hull. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the list began to correct. 2 degrees, then 3. They were going to make it. They were going to tow her back to Pearl Harbor. It would be the greatest salvage victory of the war. But the enemy was watching. A Japanese submarine, the I-168, had slipped through the destroyer's screen. Its periscope broke the surface just for a second. The captain of the sub saw the Yorktown. He saw the destroyer USS Hayman tied up next to her, providing power and water. It was the perfect target. Fire tubes 1, 2, 3, and 4. The torpedoes streaked through the water. Lookouts on the Yorktown screamed, "Torpedoes! Starboard side!" There was nothing they could do. One torpedo missed. One hit the destroyer Hammond, breaking her in half instantly. She sank in less than 4 minutes. The other 2 torpedoes went under the destroyer and smashed into the Yorktown. The shock wave knocked the salvage crew off their feet. Men were thrown against bulkheads. The ship groaned, a deep, terrible sound of finality. The rivets popped like gunfire. The water rushed in. This time, the damage was too deep. This time, the heart of the ship was broken. The salvage party was forced to evacuate again. They jumped into the water, dodging the debris and the depth charges exploding from the sinking Hammond. They watched from the nearby ships as night fell. The Yorktown held on for one more night. Even with her hull shattered, she refused to go down quickly. She waited until dawn the next day. June 7th, 1942. Slowly, with a strange dignity, the great ship turned over on her side. She rolled to port, revealing her red underbelly, scarred by battle. Then she slid stern first into the deep water, 3 miles down. There was no cheering from the survivors. Just a heavy, respectful silence. According to the official U.S. Navy report, the Yorktown absorbed punishment that should have sunk 3 ships. Her sacrifice at Midway absorbed the attacks that would have otherwise hit the other American carriers, the Enterprise and the Hornet. Because the Japanese focused everything on the unkillable ship, the other 2 American carriers survived to sink all 4 Japanese carriers. The Yorktown died so the U.S. could win the war. Archival records show that the Japanese High Command was baffled for weeks. They couldn't understand how they had sunk the same class of ship 3 times. It broke their confidence in their own intelligence. The men who served on her never forgot. Years later, a veteran who had been in the boiler room during the repairs at Pearl Harbor stood at a memorial. He touched the name on the wall. "They say steel doesn't have a soul," he said to his grandson. "But she did. She waited for us to get off. She took the hits, so we didn't have to." War creates heroes. Usually, We think of them as men with rifles or pilots in cockpits. But sometimes, the hero is 30,000 tons of steel that simply refuses to give up. This was one of them.